Hello.
I call this meeting to order. And Director, I would ask you to take roll call, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is our roll call for our special meeting this evening of May 29th, 2019. Trustee Barry.
Present.
Trustee Cram. Trustee Danaher.
Present.
Trustee Jacobs. Vice Chair McPherson.
Present.
Chair McAllister.
Present.
Trustee McRae.
Present.
Trustee McDonald.
Present.
Trustee Parisian.
Present.
Trustee Schooler.
Present.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Student Trustee Bushra-Kadra.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
I am now on the line, Director Sliwa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's Trustee Cram.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Before we begin the meeting, Vice Chair McPherson has asked if he could say a few words about an experience he had this morning or today.
Those that know me know that I don't tour schools as a general rule. But when I do tour school, now this isn't one of these fancy ads that you see, but I like to look for what I call excelling at the unexpected. And the truth of the fact is that I'm never disappointed. I always find it. Whether it be junkyard symphony on a public schoolyard fence. But today I attended PDCI, Barton District Collegiate Institute, which is, hint, hint, the oldest school within the board that is in need of replacement. However, moving on from there, when I went in, I met a young man at the door. My first instinct was, this is coincidence. He's coming out, I'm going in, nice guy, holding the door open for the old guy. And then I remembered, being an old guy, I always forget something. I'd forgot my hearing aids in the car, so I went back to the car and got my hearing aids. And When I got there, he was still there. He opened the door and he says, "Welcome to PDCI, Trustee McPherson." I'm going, wow, boy, was this ever set up. Stepped in the door, made 5 steps inside, and he passed me off to Principal Kelly Weir-Burt. I said, "That was a lovely reception you arranged." And she says, "I didn't arrange anything." I said, "What?" He said, "No, he found out you were coming, and this gentleman's name is Greg, and I hope I'm getting his name right, because he assures me that he not only watches us on web TV, he watches the Ontario Legislative Assembly and the House of Commons. And he is an amazing fountain of knowledge." So I was presenting to the grade 10 physics class. I only say one thing about that. If you think our kids don't care about tomorrow, do not go into a grade 10 physics class. They're going to set you straight. And Greg sat at the back of the class and listened to my presentation. I actually think he skipped a class somewhere, because when we were walking down the hall, somebody said, "Where were you?" And he says, "I was busy." And so he escorted me out of the school. We had an amazing discussion before I left about the future of public education in Ontario. And I want to thank Greg, and I hope you're watching, for absolutely excelling at the unexpected. Thank you.
Hello, Greg. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a motion moved by John Danaher, seconded by John McCrae, Trustee McCrae, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the special board meeting agenda of May 29, 2019. Would you cast your votes, please?
I'm still booting up here, so
I assume you are in favor then?
yes.
Don't have it yet. Could I have a show of hands, please?
I'm in favor.
In favor.
Carried. Get the next one carried, I guess. If you can. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are doing this evening is of vital importance. Okay. Are there any conflict of interest declarations? Seeing none. As I said, ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our budget deliberations, or carrying them on forward. And I just wanted to make a few comments to put the whole thing in perspective. Excuse me. We are entering the final phase of the budget process, when we, as a Board of Trustees, for the corporate entity known as the Upper Canada District School Board, must undertake final decisions. Unlike municipal governments, we do not have the ability to raise taxes. Our revenues are based almost solely on the financial resources provided to us by the ratepayers in the province of Ontario. As stewards of these resources, the board is accountable for student achievement and well-being, accountable to the provincial government, responsible for system leadership and planning, responsible for policy development, implementation and evaluation, and above all, we have a critical fiscal responsibility. In that regard, we have had to seek efficiencies during the 2018-2019 budget year, with considerations to the tune of $1.8 million this past year, resulting in a ministry-compliant budget. Going forward, STAO is also seeking efficiencies in its overall operations over the next several years. Yet, we have been successful in spite of serious pressures in several areas. For example, special education and transportation. And regarding special education, we undertook a review of special education services, resulting last week in the adoption of a new approach to the delivery of these services, which over time will allow the board to more closely align expenditures in special education with the funding that we received each year from the Ministry of Education. So what this means is that we are working hard to manage our fiscal responsibilities, and we are successfully dealing with those issues which are within our control. The second area of transportation remains problematic. Getting kids to school safely, efficiently, and sustainably is one of our primary duties. And while the GSNs, the Grant for Student Needs, provided a stabilization top-up of approximately $5 million for the 2019-2020 year, for which we are grateful. We continue, however, to deal with a legacy deficit related to the STAO arbitration decision prior to the 2019-2020 operation year next year as an unexpected burden occasioned by an arbitration judgment caused by the previous government. We are working with the present government in a positive and respectful relationship to achieve some fiscal relief for this burden, which was entirely not of our making. The work in this area is ongoing, and we are striving to achieve a successful resolution together, since we value the support and the guidance of the province in this complex situation. So, trustees, I hope I've set the table for a fulsome and informed discussion of the considerations before us. So, at this point, we are now moving into private session. So I turn the chair over to Trustee or Vice Chair.
Need a motion, Mr. Chair?
Okay. Could I have a motion, please, to move into private session? Trustee Barry, Trustee Schooler? Cast your vote, please.
Excuse me, Joe. You asked for something to get to.
Ah, there it is. Motion carries. So now I'm turning.
That's what I'm saying.
If we could get back, welcome back. I need a motion, please, to move back into the special board meeting, May 29th, 2019 at 9:01. And that is moved by Trustee Schooler, Trustee Parisien. All in favor? Do we have quorum?
Yes,
We have quorum?
Oh,
we're missing 3.
You have to ask on the phone, Mr.
Is
Chair.
Lisa there?
Is there anyone on the phone?
So, Mr. Chair, the motion dies, so we'll have to see if someone wants to move that again.
Okay. We will wait for Trustee McDonald then. And Trustee Berry.
Yep. there
And
we are.
Trustee Danaher. And now we have quorum.
Now we have quorum. You saved us. Yes, we lost quorum.
All right, I'm going to ask again that the Upper Canada District School Board move back into special board meeting, May 29th, 2019 at 9:03. There now. Trustee Parisien and Trustee Schooler. Could you vote online, please? Need a few more votes here, folks.
I have to vote here, I'm not hooked up yet.
Okay,
I'll do mine manually, okay?
all right, motion carries. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving to 601. No, which is, sorry, 801.
801?
Where are we moving to now?
6.01, Mr. Chair,
Yes,
which is, it's different, it's at 7.01 on our
yeah.
agenda.
We're now moving back into the special board meeting, Article 7.01. And we need a motion for that?
You just voted for that, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair, so now we're at
okay.
8.01.
Something is wrong with my sheet here.
So this is where we are right now.
Right. We are going to get this straightened out once. So, at this point, I believe, I'm turning it over to you, Chair, or Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Trustees, this evening, the staff are pleased to bring to you a detailed budget consideration report. You'll note from the landing page report on our electronic public agenda, the background that's there. This is the next step in a series of presentations that staff have brought forward to the board regarding the presentation of information relevant to the board building its budget for 2019-2020. Staff are working under the assumptions that you'll note in the electronic report, those 4 steps, and that is the premise under which the board is receiving the information from staff. Tonight, our senior business consultant, Mr. Richard, will update the board on some specific numbers as it relates to the budget information that you're receiving tonight. And so we've gone from some global figures that we had received, and now with the technical paper in hand that was released last Friday, the staff is able to bring some more detailed information to the board. So I'll turn that over to Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll walk you through the presentation for tonight. The first item that we're looking at that sets the stage, obviously, for the major component of the revenue from the ministry is the projected enrollment for 1920. At previous meetings, Mr. Chair, trustees would have seen, you'll recall the reference to the -14 in elementary, and I'm sure there'll be a few trustees say, wasn't that 194 for secondary, and it is. It's only because if you look down at the bottom of the notes, you'll see minus 40.3 for secondary greater than 21 years of age, and that 40 plus the 153.86 gives you just about 194. So in case you were wondering about that, it's just been put in with the adult ed and continuing education. So you can see overall a minor reduction. Obviously, that's been very tempered from years ago when there was much more significant decline in the enrollment. That's a good news. You always want a positive. However, a small reduction is tolerable. Mr. Chair, just maybe a little recap for the trustees. You'll recall from previous meetings, we're looking at a 2019-20 budget gap estimated to be 11.7 million, which includes, of course, the approximately 8.6 million in special education deficit, which represent expenses over revenue. Perhaps I'd make 2 points here, Mr. Chair, that I think are significant. And as you know, we've been gradually getting the information from the ministry. April 26th, we got the GSNs. A week and a half, 2 weeks later, we got the EFIS forms. And lo and behold, on Friday, just this past Friday, we finally received the technical paper. And of course, it's very important for staff because we use that to check our numbers with respect to our initial estimates for what we're looking at. And I'm happy to say that we don't expect any major changes based on the EFIS forms. Looking at the tech paper over the weekend and Monday and today, we believe the 11.7 is pretty firm. We're always worried about major shifts or surprises, but we're pretty confident that the 11.7 million is a good number. Mr. Chair, the second point that I think is very important is that we could have actually had this start at 5 million higher. The true deficit is probably 16.7 million, but as you well know, and Mr. Chair, you so aptly had included in your opening remarks, that one of the major funding items this year is going to be that stabilization fund that they're providing to school boards who have a high rating in their transportation service provision and have expenditures that exceed the revenue, then you'll get 100% coverage. And for our board, it's approximately 5 million. And so we've left that out. We did that as a wash and said we have a 5 million over expenditure in transportation. We know they're getting 5 million. So, but we could have done the 16.7 and then subtracted 5 and got back at the 11.7. So I think it's worth noting that, we're very thankful that the ministry did listen to boards, and probably we would be one of the main boards that they listened to and provided the board with that additional funding, or this problem fiscally would be a lot bigger. Mr. Chair, therefore, to achieve a balanced budget in accordance with the Ministry of Education regulations, and for this year, that means a balanced budget. The Upper Canada District School Board must reduce the planned spending by $11.7 million. If we then, just for the trustees to go back over the budget guiding principles, balanced budget, as I explained, for 1920, based on the regulations set out by the ministry for this year. Trustees are being provided with a range of possible reductions for your consideration to achieve that balanced budget. And we're providing recommendations for budget priorities, including both additions, minor additions, and mainly reductions. And then, of course, one of the founding guiding principles is the gradual reduction in overspending in spec ed to more directly align with the actual funding that the board gets from the ministry. So if we start to look at the actual budget considerations, Mr. Chair, we look at program level. At the program level, we're looking at the early childhood educators allocation. Trustees will recall that in past presentations I've outlined that has to do with the changing in the funding allocation for ECEs based on, it was at 1.14 and now down to 1.0. That does result in the $925,000 reduction in grants allocated from the ministry for that purpose. And we're putting forth that we would handle that allocation completely within the existing complement of the ECEs, and that would require a more efficient allocation for September of how those are allocated into the kindergarten classrooms, and senior staff believe that that can be handled appropriately. We're talking about basically the same issue with the grades 4 to 8. You'll recall that was moving from a funding allocation of 23.85, although the average class size within the funding model is actually 24.5. And not unlike at the elementary level in grades 4 to 8, to be able to absorb that 1.2 million. And so for September, principals have been asked to be very efficient in terms of their allocating for classrooms. A perfect example is in the past, they might have looked and thought, well, I've got 2 average, you know what, I'll just put 1 in each class. Well, now they'll be a little more efficient and try to make sure they use and stay within the model. Secondary programming, that was used mainly for student success teachers, Mr. Chair. And basically what that was is it funded additional student success teachers above the 25 to 1 that is in the secondary agreement. That funding is terminating as of August 31st, 2019. And therefore the idea would be to reduce the number so it matches what's in the collective agreement. Currently, for the 2017-18 and 18-19 school year, the board was using the rural and northern education funding just above the approximately 1.9 million to fund a pilot project for additional guidance counselors in certain schools that meet the criteria. One of the considerations being put forth is a possible reallocation of that funding to offset the $11.7 million budget gap that the board is facing. And so that pilot has concluded, and it would simply just be reallocating the money. Reductions from the program department, that would involve a couple of positions being reduced in the program department in order to achieve savings of approximately $74,000. Mr. Chair, the next item is a somewhat larger item, and it is a reorganization of the current delivery model in the TR Leger Continuing Education Department, which would involve some reorganization of the current sites, as well as some efficiency in staffing allocations, in the hope of achieving just under $700,000 in savings. And so at the program level for these items, we're talking just over 5.6 million in potential savings. If we move to the program support section, we look here at a possible reduction in system teachers. These would be teachers that provide system-type supports throughout the board, and would be a question of just reducing the number of positions that provide that support, and that would be approximately 10 positions and would result in approximately a savings of $1 million. We would also be looking, Mr. Chair, at a potential reduction in system principal assignments. That represents 2 system principal positions. Mr. Chair, I think as we pointed out in a previous presentation that we know that the ministry under the old system was providing what's called EPO grants, Education Program Other, now called Priorities and Partnership Funds, PPFs. We've received the initial allocation of 10 of those. We know there are more to come. We don't have them now, so we have to plan accordingly. Should we get more information, positive information of additional funding coming in these other PPFs, there's certainly the potential for maintaining some of these positions. Reductions from the program department, you'll see a sizable potential saving there, and that would be a reallocation in the learning or the commons area with respect to LCIs, and there is the potential there for a reorganization that would provide savings of just in excess of $800,000. The reduction in the TR Leger harkens back to the one we did under the program. The 689 is more staffing that's directly related to program. And then if we come back and look at, this is part of the same reorganization, but this is a managerial position under the TR Leger administrative costs. Not a loss in job, but simply a reassignment of a manager to another position, therefore resulting in a savings of just over $127,000. Another possibility, Mr. Chair, is to look at the possible reduction in school administrators by way of looking at some twinning of schools in the district, and there would be a combination of 6 double schools that would be looked at, and would potentially result, if all of those were put into effect, in savings of just over $760,000. And at the program support level, that would result in additional savings of just over $3 million. If we look at school operations, we see there that the school operations department is going to see a reduction of approximately $610,000. Mr. Chair, that's mainly due, as we've indicated in the past, due to the 22 to 28 class size change. The government then assumes that you don't need as much space because the classes are larger, and they assume that you'll act accordingly to dispose of that necessity to clean and heat and light that area. And so there would be a combination of endeavors within that department that Superintendent Hobbs would look at to achieve those savings of just over $600,000. And then the final part of the TR Leger continuing education reorganization would result in some additional savings of $114,540. And that is mainly in the areas of transportation or facilities costs that would be saved that you would no longer have to pay for. And under school operations, that total reduction would be just over $700,000. School office administration, we're looking potentially at a reorganization of the school office support staff in the schools, both elementary and secondary. And the idea here, Mr. Chair, would be to move to realign the actual total complement much more in line with the actual funding that comes from the Ministry of Education for that purpose, which is for school administration support staff in all of our schools, and that would potentially achieve savings just over $1 million. And then finally, there is, as part of that total reorganization for the TR Leger Continuing Ed department, some minor savings in terms of some small reduction in office staff as part of the total reorganization. And so that would result in total school office administration savings of just over $1 million. Central administration, we see there a reduction in 3 offices, one at the superintendent, and then 2 in, one in finance department, one in communications. And 2 of those positions would be vacant right now, so we're not talking about job loss. Simply, those positions would not be filled, and those savings would go to the bottom line for the board. And so almost $350,000 in savings in central administration staff. And Mr. Chair, before we look at special education, anything specific, we're looking at, based on solely those budget considerations, we're looking at just almost $11 million. We also are going to re-look at those areas I've just gone through, Mr. Chair, and we're going to now put them within the impact level assessment that the board has seen over the last several years. The definitions are before you. You'll see there the low impact at that we have operational contingencies in place for addressing the loss of the resource, and so it has limited impact on the provision of programs and services at the school or district level. Medium means there are fewer operational. We do have some contingencies in place, but might not be to the extent that we have under the low category. And then finally, high-level impact would be there are limited or no viable operational contingencies, and so we would see wide-range impact on the provision of some programs or services. And keeping those three definitions in mind, we've now regrouped them under the three-level impact. So if we look at level 1, we see the early childhood educators allocation reduction, the reduction in staffing to meet the classroom teacher allocation from the ministry, as well as the secondary programming, which is the approximately 8 positions under student success. The school operations allocation, and then of course the central admin staffing, 2 of those positions. And then the final 2 would be the reductions from the TR Leger continuing education. You saw previously, Mr. Chair, there were several components, and the total of all those components is just over 990,000 savings under the TR Leger continuing ed. And then finally, reductions from the program department for 187, giving you approximately 4.9 million with respect to total level 1 savings. If we look at level 2 impact assessment, we have the reallocation of the rural and northern education program from rural guidance counselor pilot project that we've referred to, the reduction in the school office support staff, reduction in those 10 system teachers, and reduction in the school administrators, twinning of schools. Only the level 2 portion of that consideration. There is a level 3 portion if the board were to accept going even further in terms of reducing some of the school administration levels in the twin schools. And then we have the reduction in system principal amounts, that's those 2 positions. And then the further reduction in central administrative is the superintendent position that will not be filled. And that results in total level 2 of just under 5 million. And then under level 3, Mr. Chair, we see those 2 items. One is the further reductions from the program department and the further reduction in school administrators, as I mentioned just previously, in the twinning of schools, going to the next level and reducing that support even more. That results in a further 1 million potential savings for the board, and results in that same number you saw earlier, 10.9 million in savings before we look at special education. We're presenting for your consideration this evening, Mr. Chair. When we look at Spec Ed, we're looking at 3 scenarios. One is a level 1 analysis of potential expenditure reductions. And I should point out, Mr. Chair, there would be a host of components that would go into reductions of certain employee and whatnot that would result in those amounts being saved. So at the level 1 category, you can see 815,000 approximately. Then there is a second level reduction that could be made that would result in about $2.2 million in savings. And then at level 3, if we wanted to go deeper into the cuts, it would be approximately 4.4 million. And just to remind trustees, Mr. Chair, the total over expenditure in special education at this point is approximately 8.7 million. So you see there, even at level 3, you're still talking a deficit of approximately $4.4 million in special education. And so therefore you end up with sort of a band of anywhere from 815,000 to 4.4 million, depending on which, if any, of the scenarios the board decided to go with in the end. And if we now look at the total, the initial under the level 1, 2, 3, as well as the special education, looking at scenario 1, 2, 3, if we only look at the level 1 reductions, you would be landing on $11.7 million reductions, which just happens to be the amount of reductions that the board is looking at initially in order to balance the budget for 2019-20. If the board were to go with level 2, there would actually be in excess of the 11.7, it would be 13.1 million, which obviously provides the board with an opportunity to either look at other areas to put back some of the services that you're looking at reducing, or start building a small reserve or contingency to look forward to. And then if the board were to go to level 3, obviously, then you're looking at 15.3, provides the boards, obviously, that's a level 3 reduction, which you'd have to consider very carefully. But if you did do it, then you'd have even extra contingency money sitting there, either to add back services in other areas or to provide a bigger contingency going forward. And Mr. Chair, that is the presentation for this evening, and we would be glad to take any questions you may have.
Trustees, there's a lot to chew on there. We've done some work earlier. Are there any questions? Trustee McDonald?
Thank you. One of the pieces that is driving the 11.7 million is the loss of the local priorities funding. Could you, or could I get an explanation of what the amount is in the local priorities funding that's contributing to the 11 million, and what did that funding provide for Upper Canada?
Mr. Chair, at a high level, I can tell you was approximately 3.8 million, 3.6 million that you got, and that was part, if you recall at a previous meeting, part of the extension agreements that were negotiated with the various groups and all the various components. So the board was allocated 3.6 million for 17-18 and 18-19. That funding ends at the end of August of this year, and so you simply lost the 3.6 million. I do know a component of that went to support special education and a few other areas. We can certainly get the specifics if you want to know exactly where, but that's what it was used for.
Trustee McDonald?
So I'm being a little facetious when I ask the question, because I do know where it goes, but the money was there to support children in need at high-risk students in adult education. And so that was put in place to help offset some of those costs associated to the boards. Is there any indication that the local priorities funding will be reinstated as a result of that reduction? Or is it, as the government indicated, it's not in the GSNs right now, but I also understand that they made a comment that it hasn't gone completely necessarily.
Mr. Chair, that's a very good point, and the trustee is absolutely correct, is that it is not in the GSNs right now, it's not in the technical paper. However, they've been very clear that it forms part of the negotiations that are coming up with the various groups, and so they've allowed that there could be more information to come, but there's absolutely nothing at this point that is saying that we will get additional money, but it's certainly not a closed door completely.
I'd like to ask a question myself, if I could. In these figures and these considerations, no consideration includes what we used to call the EPO grants. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, as you'll recall in a couple previous presentations, when we did the explanation or the highlights of the release with the GSNs, as part of that release, they released 10 of the what we now call PPFs, or what you referred to, Mr. Chair, as the EPOs. Yes, there was 10. You recall one was math, 2-point-something million, Indigenous education. There was very small amounts, but we know there were many more than that over the past years, and we keep hearing that potentially more are coming, and we are waiting for those. So there is the potential for more of those to come forward.
Okay, thank you. Trustee McDonald? And
I want to ask the question about the 11.7 million. So I want to know if it deals with, in your deficit associated to paying for the arbitration ruling with Steele, And does it also include the reduction in funding for international students, which would probably impact us in the area of $500,000? Is that included in the 11.7?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't hear exactly. It had to do with STAO, something?
So is there current in-year deficit for STAO? Is that included in the 11.7?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Remember at the start of my presentation, it is there, but to the extent that it's entirely covered. When we do the financial statements at the end of this year for 18-19, whatever that turns out to be, 100% of it will be covered in 1920. So the answer is yes, it is, but there is no impact on the 1920 budget. It's completely covered. So that's the first one.
Okay, can I deal with that one for a second? It's going to deal with the 1920, but right now, we're spending more than we're getting in transportation. We've also exhausted all of our surplus. So what is that current 2018-19 deficit related to transportation?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the 18-19 has not been covered, as you well know. The ministry is not covering that at this point, although I know that the board is continuing with discussions in that regard. It's not covered. However, you are sitting compliant at this point, and that was part of your exercise that you did back in March, when I believe staff brought to you for your consideration, and you made decisions to the tune of $700,000 plus. That puts you in compliant. It means you're using most of the reserves to cover those, but you are still compliant. But you wouldn't have very much in the way of reserves left to cover anything new that came along. So.
Okay. And I don't remember my second question.
I just had I think I know what your question is.
I remember, I think, I heard the second part, Mr. Chair. I believe it had to do with international students and the $1,300. It is part of this. It's been taken into account, but for the time being, the idea is it will be handled within the International Ed Department. They have reserves that they have created for contingencies within their own incremental department, and they will be using that this year to handle that one item.
So my concern, though, is that if they're handling it internally, that's a small Band-Aid approach, because we're going to get impacted later on. So if we're using those reserves, those are actually our reserves, not their reserves, because it comes back into Upper Canada District School Board. So we are actually doing without that revenue that could be transferred into the board. Are we actually going to be facing either reductions in the operational cost of the international component, or are we going to be able to charge more to at least offset the cost recovery or the cost draw or the expense drawback from the ministry?
Mr. Chair, in response, the trustees answered the question. Yes, the department's looking. What was difficult is all of the planning has been done for September, so not unlike the municipalities who argued they had some retroactive decreases, that's hit them at the point where they can't go back now to people and say we're upping the rates, but they are planning to look at the increasing of the rates to absorb that decrease as they go forward. So it shouldn't have a permanent effect going forward.
So my follow-up to that then is, can we reduce spending within that section so that we can still have the benefit of that revenue that's sitting in that reserves to help deal with some of the other pressures that we're facing now?
Mr. Chair, we could certainly ask the department to look at that.
Mr. McRae?
How much are they? How much is in those reserves for the international students?
How much are the reserves from? We'll get the answer.
We'll get that answer in a moment. Trustee Ferguson.
Right. This is strictly driven by our existing deficit. We haven't even stepped into the budget yet, right? So
No.
at what point do we indicate what level of restraints we're willing to go with? Like, or are you going to, like, what's the next step in the process? Because I see level 1 essentially bring us to ground zero. Level 2 gives us, on paper, dollars above our current deficit, and level 3 even more dollars. So at what point do we roll this into revenue and expenses and see which areas we're going to pick? And I'm thinking it's going to be a hybrid model. I guess, at what point do we pick our comfort level? We haven't got a lot of time.
Director?
Mr. Chair, through you, perhaps the purpose of the presentation tonight is actually to jumpstart that deliberation that the board would need to establish. What is their desire to pursue any of the scenarios and choices presented by staff this evening, and the comfort level would be determined by the table. But I'll turn that back over to you in case you have some comments about that.
Just to add, Director, our work this evening is not complete. We may be looking at a hybrid solution for various areas, and I think that is the work that we will be completing on June 5th, June 12th, and June 19th.
And maybe the 26th. Hopefully not.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Trustee McRae? Excuse me. Did you have an answer?
Yes, Mr. Chair. It's approximately 2.8 million that they have under the UCLC, but that already shows on the books for the board. When you're looking at, as the trustee pointed out, Trustee McDonald, that is already showing on your books. You own those ultimately, and so I just wanted to make that clear.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Any further questions? Yes, Trustee McRae?
I'm curious, we have 80 schools, 79, 80 schools. How many buildings do we have? How many buildings that aren't, I guess don't, besides this one, that don't house students?
Mr. Chair, I'd ask perhaps if Mr. Hobbs would like to begin an estimate of that, and then I think it would probably be helpful to define a building, because we have a wide array of infrastructure that the school board supports.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to leave garden sheds out for the moment and shade structures, but I would say probably, without giving you an exact number, aside from actual schools that are in operation, we would have probably on the order of, you can probably count on two hands the number of additional buildings that we would own, maybe less, that would be used for a variety of other purposes, like the Frankville Administration Center is one, but the old Central Public School in Prescott is another one that's still owned but being used by TR Leger. And then we do have another series of facilities that we sometimes lease that we don't own for uses like TR Leger as well.
So there might be a revenue generated in association with some buildings.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the phones, any questions? Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, that concludes our budget discussion for tonight. Mr. Richard, thank you. We appreciate it. Is there more?
There's only more from the extent to what direction the board would be giving us for the 5th. I believe the Vice Chair brought up a very good point about when do we actually look. Well, we usually wait until we get direction from the board on those reductions, then we turn that into the numbers to bring back to you. So just so you know, that will happen once you tell us which component you want us to work into the budget. So, or what do you want us to bring back on June 5th? I think we've had some indication of a few things.
McPherson?
I'd just like to make a comment. As we know, we're entering into another era next fall with transportation. And I think we have to bear in mind some of the impact that will have on our schools before we consider some of the impact that's contained here. I'm a little nervous about lowering administration in schools. There could be a fair bit of turmoil in September. So, just an observation.
Thank you.
Do you get many phone calls?
Director, to Mr. Richard's question, what further direction can we give you and your staff tonight?
Well, Mr. Chair, through you, I think helping us to understand the slide number 15 in the slide deck, which was that range of considerations that is based on a lower impact, a medium impact, and a higher impact, it would support the staff's efforts to understand what perhaps information the board would wish to receive that would help to support the conversations that they wish to have in their next meeting.
Trustees, I'm going to make a statement. Tell me if I'm wrong. Are we in agreement, certainly level 1 will be in effect in all areas?
Chair, are you suggesting level 1 with no changes, just as it is?
No, but as a basis for further discussion.
I agree.
Be level 1 plus, obviously.
Yes.
I'll make a comment. There are parts of number 1 that I just I want to object to, I want to discuss, I want to throw out.
Okay.
I would say this is the first time I've seen some of this stuff. I want to digest it a little.
But it's the best of those 3, obviously.
I think it's fair to say that we will be looking at level 1 for the most part, plus a hybrid model. Anybody else can clarify that further than I just did? Trustee McDonald?
Well, I think
Trustee Cram?
Well, I think if your statement is at least level 1, Chair, then I think you're probably right, but I'm not certain that I want to leave it at level 1. Level 1 doesn't give us any maneuverability at all in anything. I'm more inclined to look at a level 2, but I think it's the dollar figure we have to look at. I think we just can't look at and say let's take level 2 as it is, because we've got some maneuverability to work in level 2, and we have to hash out some issues because we're in a tough bind, and I don't think we can pass our budget quickly, because I think we need a lot of talk to do this properly.
Anyone else?
John, just a comment, or Chair, to the Chair. I don't think we should rush this. Like, I think we need to chew on this for a week, maybe get together when we get together next week. This is some big decision.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we do this tonight.
I agree with Trustee Cram that we need to sort of chew on this for a while.
Right. So we will reconvene next Wednesday and take another go at it. How's that? Director?
Mr. Chair, if I can just confirm so that staff knows how to prepare for next week's meeting. I heard start with level 1, bring additional information that would help support the conversation about level 1. And if there is the concept of a hybrid being, if I understand correctly, parts of either level 2 or level 3, but level 1 is the focal point where the board wants to initiate its dialogue and get into the particulars, if I heard that correctly.
I would say that's accurate.
Okay.
Trustee McCray?
And I would like to know that, and it has gone over quite a bit tonight, but the specific job losses that are expected in that, in what departments, and when we see that org chart, we'll have a better understanding of okay, there, good.
So having concluded item 801, we are now moving into private session on a matter of personnel. And I need a motion. Moved by Trustee Barry, seconded by Trustee Petitjean, that the Upper Canada District School Board move into committee of the whole May 29th, 2019 at 9:44 p.m. And now I need a second motion to move into private session. Moved by trustee Danaher, trustee Schooler, that the committee of the whole move into private session number 2, May 29, 2019.
Mr. Chair, I need a vote on motion number
Did we
1.
not vote on number 1?
Not vote on it.
Number 1, we're voting on number 1 then to move into committee of the whole.
Show of hands.
Show of hands. In favor, all.
I had it in my screen instead of the-
So now we're taking the vote on motion 2, move into private session. All in favor? That's carried. And we are now into private session.